I was meant to film a completely different video today. Actually, I spent like an hour and a half filming it, and then it didn't turn out the way I wanted, and I got hella frustrated, and then I decided to mope. And while I was moping, I watched a video by Morgan Long, who is another person who talks about books on YouTube. She always inspires me, and this particular video that I was watching was talking about books that had changed her life, and hearing her vulnerability and listening to bits and pieces of her life story just really inspired me to think about the books that had changed my life and why those particular books were so important to my upbringing and to who I am right now. So I guess you could say that this is an homage to Morgan, but if this is too copycatty, please let me know. The 5 books that have changed my life, I think the first one would be The Witches by Roald Dahl. And I say this because The Witches is a placeholder for multiple books. It is truly, I think, one of the books that has changed my life, but it's also a placeholder for a whole slew of books in my very young childhood that got me through some shit. Not to like go into a whole sad backstory, but very early on in my life, I had to figure out that I wasn't necessarily safe with the people that I was with, and people who I loved weren't safe either. And escapism in books was something that truly saved my life, especially at such a young age. And books like The Witches, where you have these kids who are so loved by their guardians, really just spoke to me. If you don't know the plot of The Witches, essentially the main character gets turned into a rat, and then his grandma, who is his guardian, like helps him take down the group of witches who turned him into a rat. And it's just, it's exceptionally sweet and funny and weird, and it helped me from a young age recognize that there are people in the world who will look after you, even if you turn into a rat. And if there are people like that, then there are people who will love you no matter what. Moving into like middle school, high school, my favorite book of all time is Hidden Talents by David Lubar. The reason this book is my favorite, I think it was at a precipice of my life where I really loved writing, and I was trying to figure out kind of basic things, what style I wanted to have, what I wanted to write about. I was trying to find my voice, and it was really dramatic because I was like 12 at the time, but it was important to 12-year-old me. And this book really helped me figure out what I wanted to say. And the things about books that I really loved. This is a book about found family. It's a book about pseudoscience. It's a book about just friends being really good to each other. It was fun. It includes found texts in the book, so like you'll have like letters from other members from like outside the narrative. And like stylistically, thematically, it just aligned with what I continued to write today. So in that way, this book helped me find my voice. I spent about 6-month period living in Rome in my undergrad, and that was the best time. It was also really lonely. It was a time in my life where I was trying to figure out how I wanted to live, what I wanted to do. It was the very first time that I was completely on my own, and if you've ever been in a situation like that, you know that it's terrifying. It's freeing, but it's terrifying, and you feel very groundless. And I barely spoke the language. There was very simple things that I had trouble learning. And one of the books that I took with me on this trip was Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. This is actually the only Ernest Hemingway book that I've ever enjoyed. This is like a memoir of his time living in Paris. And I think I read it like 2 or 3 times while I was abroad. And parts of it are like an on-writing, informal on-writing book. And other parts are just talking about, his life, his meeting with F. Scott Fitzgerald, his meeting with Ezra Pound, I believe, is in here too. It tells snippets of the Lost Generations authors who had expatriated themselves to Paris. And I remember after reading this book, visiting Paris, and it was such a beautiful moment. I think that I went in March, and so there weren't a lot of tourists. It was pretty cold. That's about how I like to travel. It was kind of the first time in my life where I realized that I could take dozens of paths and still be exceptionally happy. I think that up until that point, I had been under the impression that, there's one path that leads to the ultimate happiness, and all other paths will be subpar to that one. And at the time I was studying to be an archaeologist, but I loved writing. At the time, I was dealing with my gender identity and my sexuality, and I was trying to find that one path. And A Moveable Feast and my time in Paris really helped me navigate through the fact that there are different paths that can make you equally as happy. And you just have to kind of work with what you've got. I could be in half a dozen different places right now in my life, in half a dozen universes, and I'm in this one. And it's because of decisions that I made. And I think that, there's probably timelines where I'm happier than I am now, but I'm also exceptionally happy now. And I think that it's important to know that I guess that you can't mess up, that you can be happy in different ways with different choices, and that's okay. And that is what I learned from A Moveable Feast. The next books, the last 2 books, are both a little bit sad, or they helped me through a little bit of a sad time. So the Tsar of Love and Techno, I picked this book up at the bookstore one morning recently after my grandma had died. So my grandma died when I was an undergrad, and she died pretty suddenly, and I didn't get to see her before she died, and we live in different countries, so I didn't get to see her and visit her until 9 months after she had passed. So in that period where I really didn't have a lot of closure for her death, I picked up this book. And it's a hardcover, so it was like $30, and I really didn't have the money, but there was something about it that like drew me to it. It's not necessarily my normal kind of read, but I don't know, I just picked it up. Like I just had a feeling. And I took a lot of journeys like that during this time period when my roommate would be like sleeping, and it would be like 6 a.m. in college, and I would just go to the closest Barnes & Noble and be alone. And it sounds kind of sad when I put it like that. It's the worst loss I've ever experienced, and at the time I needed the ability to process and to not have to put on a show for anybody. I think that, not that my friends wouldn't have let me just be sad, but I think that something inside me needed to be alone for more than I used to need. And I found myself in bookstores. This book is beautiful. It's beautifully written. It's about people in during the USSR and after the USSR in Eastern Europe. And it's lovely. It's like, this book got me back into loving reading and loving like experimental writing and learning new things about this world. It also deals with a brother's death and how this brother he was missing in action, so nobody recovered his body, nobody knew where he was, and how his family members tried to come to terms with that, and how they end up finding closure within that. The next one is, and the last one, is Meditations in an Emergency by Frank O'Hara. And this is a poetry collection. Frank O'Hara was initially assigned to me in grad school. In grad school, in my first year of grad school, my brother was diagnosed with cancer. And I had previously checked out this book from the library and read through it before my brother's diagnosis, and then once again, and I don't know, I don't know what part of my brain, why part of my brain does this, but as soon as I got the news, just like with my grandma's death, I knew I needed this book right then. I made my partner drive out to the Barnes & Noble to get this book. There's something so flippant about Frank O'Hara. There's something urgent about his writing and campy about his writing that is underlaid with a lot of pain. There was a long time with my brother's diagnosis where we didn't know how bad it was going to be. And this book, it's something that I could read because it's poetry. It was very fast. At the same time, I could read it multiple times. I could zone out. No one was expecting me to concentrate very hard. And so to have just little bite-sized things to read to distract myself and then, think things through was really helpful. Growing up, I really didn't have an awareness of queer literature. And having Frank O'Hara's joy. I think, there are other queer poets, Allen Ginsberg, Walt Whitman, who don't have the same level of just cheekiness. I think Frank O'Hara delights me because he's so fucking happy about himself. And it's almost pompous, it's almost narcissistic, and considering who he was in the time period he lived in, it is absolutely a triumph. And he helped me through. Anyway, this is just to say thank you to Morgan Long, and thank you to books for being there and for being an important part of my trauma response, apparently.